Are you okay? Good to go? Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this public information session on the Offshore Morro Bay Wind Project with Trident Winds. My name is Don Maruska, and I'm a local business person here and have worked with the city and others for the past 2 decades that we've lived here. And I've been asked by Trident Winds to help you in engaging in this discussion and help you in getting questions and issues answered this evening. So that's my role here tonight, is to try to be as helpful to you as I can in bringing out the information and issues and topics that are of interest to you. I'd just like to say a couple things at the outset about what I think will be helpful to our community in having this discussion tonight. We're going to have a presentation from the Trident Winds folks so that you can be hearing what they have in mind. We'll then be going to take written questions, inviting you to write questions on these green cards that are at the back, and I have more up here at the front. So encourage you to do that. What that does is it gives me a way that I can organize similar topics together, and rather than having it be sort of haphazard, we can get similar topics clustered and get a more in-depth discussion than might otherwise be possible. And then we're also going to have opportunities for you to ask questions at the microphone if you'd wish to do that as well. So we want to give you multiple ways you can participate. There's also an email address, info@tridentwinds.com, where you can be sending information to them or be adding them to your email list and that sort of thing. And we do have the email handout sheets in the back, the yellow sheets, and that's so that you can, if you'd like to get proactively get information about the program and about the things that are happening, that's your way to do it. Otherwise, there's information on the city's website. Just as a note about that, the Morro Bay City Council entered into a memorandum of cooperation with the Trident Winds organization. The primary purpose, as I read that, was to really provide opportunities for the public to hear and learn about the project at the various stages as it proceeds. So that rather than you wondering what's going on, who's doing what in our community, you have a chance to periodically and as the program and project progresses, learn about it directly, okay? And have a chance like this one this evening to interact. Just a note about this evening's session. This is a public information session. It is not part of a formal public hearing process for this project because the Trident Winds has not submitted a formal application. Once they do, there's a whole cascade of public information sessions, public hearings, independent experts that create information about the potential impacts of the project and opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. And all those are publicly noticed, and there'll be public opportunities to go through that. So I know, as I've read through the materials and looked at the things that are on the city's website, and you can see everything that's available on the city's website. So you just go to the Morro Bay website and search Trident, and you'll find everything that's currently available about it. This is an opportunity for you to understand the nature of this project, how it is that Trident Winds is approaching it, what they're trying to do to reach out to you and other constituencies to understand your needs and interests and to hear more about them this evening, okay? So you may find, relative to other things that you're used to, other hearings and so on, where there's something concrete and solid on the table and all the experts have provided the answers, this won't be as deep as that. This is a first look, okay? And so that's really the purpose of this evening. And I just want you to none of us to come away in the community here frustrated that, wow, they didn't have all the answers. Well, this is really an opportunity to identify, okay, what is the nature of the project, what are the questions, and what are the things that would be important to address of your concerns as they go forward and evaluate the project and the opportunities. I've just had the occasion to meet Alla and Eric this evening in person for the first time, but just a little bit about their background. Alla has been working, Alla Weinstein, she's a technologist by background, so she's into how things work from an engineering point of view, has been involved in the wind energy field, looking at what are the technologies, how to work with them effectively, and what's essential to be successful in serving the renewable energy needs that are out there. And Eric Markel was former CFO of the Puget Sound public utility and active and involved in figuring out how to develop projects that would be supportive of renewable energy and other energy needs in that community. So they're here this evening to share with you the information that they have available, and then we'll be breaking out into questions. And again, I encourage you, if you've got questions, please write them down on the green cards. We will give that first priority in an organized discussion and then have open mic from there. So anybody need a card that doesn't have a card? And anybody who's checking in from the televised version of this session, we just highlight you can go to the city's website and search on Trident, and you'll be able to see the additional information there about the project. So with that, I'd like to introduce Alla and Eric, and they'll be presenting their PowerPoint here, and then we'll move into questions.
Thank you, Don. Is it on? Yeah, it is on. As Don said, I'm Alla Weinstein. I'm the founder of Trident Winds, and here today with me is co-founder Eric Markel. We have one more person with us who is with the company, and we would like to give you an overview of our project. I've been in the industry for many years, more than I want to admit. Half of my career was with the corporate environment at Honeywell, where I did avionics design, put them on airplanes. The other half of my career was in the ocean, in marine renewables. My first company that I started in 2001 was developing a wave energy device in Macao Bay, Washington. And we were the first in the nation to receive a permit to install a wave energy installation in that location. But it didn't become reality because technology was not mature enough. I then turned around after I sold the company and said, we still don't have any energy coming from the ocean, yet the ocean gives us the most amount of renewable energy, so we have to do something about it. And I wanted to get something done while I still was in the workforce. And really, floating offshore wind became that type of technology because it combines two mature principles, the oil and gas foundations that exist and they know how to install them, how to work them, and wind turbines that exist on land and now have been installed in offshore as well. So I started another company called Principal Power, which has developed the floating offshore wind technology, has installed the demonstration project, and now progressing to the pre-commercial project. I left the company in January of this year, and then I started Trident Winds because we now need to deploy technology. Technologies are great, wonderful, unless they're used. And to use them takes a long time to go through the permitting process, through public outreach, and that is what we decided to do. I then reached out to Eric, whom I knew for a few years, and I said, I know how to do the environment technology, the offshore part. I'm not as good as doing the on-land part. How do you bring the energy and put it in the grid and do all that stuff? And I'll let Eric talk about his experience, but that's why we needed team members that have experience in various elements of project development, and that's exactly what we did. We assembled a team of experts that know how to get things done. I think you can use the mic there.
Good evening. My name is Eric Markel. I am a retired executive from the electric power industry, where I've spent about 35 years doing a whole lot of things in that industry, about half as an executive of investor-owned utilities and about half as an executive of independent power companies. While at Puget Sound Energy in Bellevue, Washington, we designed and built the first utility-scale wind projects in the Pacific Northwest and have expanded those several times since then. And we've also built the largest solar project within a wind facility in the Pacific Northwest. I've been doing business in California in the energy business since the early 90s, including projects such as rice hull burning power plants up in the Wadham area near Sacramento in the rice growing region. I was retired minding my own business when Allah approached me and said, "Would you be interested in helping?" And I said I would, because I thought the technology and the opportunity here was quite unusual and had a lot of promise. So that has brought us to this community. There's a good wind resource off this part of California. And as you all know, there's an abandoned power plant on your waterfront that has high voltage electric interconnect to the backbone high voltage grid in California. And that, of course, is a critical element in any project like this. So we're here to describe our ideas today and to hear your questions.
So with that, I will go through the presentation that's going to answer the question that I did not answer last time I did the presentation here to the City Council, and that is the location of the project. At that time, we were much early in the process. We didn't yet have a chance to talk to the fishermen, to the Morro Bay Commercial Fishing Organization, and we didn't have a chance to do research in all the environmental layers that we have access to identify the site that would be optimized for various elements. And today we can't tell you where that site would be, and that's what we would like to do, and then we would be more than happy to answer any questions that you all have. One thing that I did want to state at the beginning, same as Don, it's expectations. This is a very long process. We have not yet made even step number one. And step number one is submitting an unsolicited application to Bureau of Ocean Management. That starts the process. We are looking at probably 5 to 7 years before the project would be licensed, permitted, and will have a lease to install offshore. During that process, there will be a lot of opportunities for public commenting, for participation, for everything that is required. And we are following a federally prescribed process for leasing ocean floor on outer continental shelf. And that process is managed by the Bureau of Ocean Management, offices of them located in Camarillo, California, and that is our lead agency. So with that, why did this project even become reality? Why was it possible to conceive a project like that? Until about 2008 to probably 2008, it was not even possible to think about offshore wind project in California because the water depth prevents installation of fixed foundations. Today in Europe, we have over 10 gigawatts of installed capacity. 10 gigawatts would be about 12 of the plants that you have here, if you take the gigawatt potential of those plants. But all those installations are fixed. They're sitting on the bottom of the ocean floor. That is not possible to do in Morro Bay or anywhere else for that matter on the west coast of the United States because our continental shelf is very narrow and it drops off very quickly. And so because of that, you needed different technologies. You needed floating offshore wind technologies. The first installation was done in 2009 by a Norwegian company, Statoil, and the device is called Trident. It is a long spar. It requires the water depth of about 200 meters. And in Norway, you have those locations where that is possible to do. That device is now progressing from the prototype, the picture that you see on the most left corner, to the installation of 30 megawatts, which would be about 5 devices in Scotland. And that installation would be completed by 2017. The next device is Principal Power's WindFloat. That is the company that I started and exited earlier this year. That prototype was installed in Portugal in 2011. It has been in operation since then. Both of them are operating. And now that device is progressing to a 25 megawatt installation also in Portugal that would be installed in 2018. Until those technologies or dreams or devices that have not been proven were proven, it was not possible to conceive a project because we're talking about a 1,000 gigawatt project. That's going to require bank financing. Until devices or technologies have been proven in the field for a certain number of years and they've been bank financed, it would not be possible to do a project of this size. And that is why we're looking after 2020. At least both of those would be already demonstrated, proven, and bank financed in Europe, and we will be able to use them in a larger setting. So it's a part of technology development and evolution that takes time to get from here to there. But at the same time, we realize that we have to go through a pretty extensive permitting process, and that's why we're starting now. It's going to take us 5 to 7 years to get through the permitting process, and that's why we need to do what we're doing right now. So after 2020, we see that probably about 200 megawatts of installed capacity will be done or will be already installed around the world using floating support structures, and we will be able to then utilize those support structures in a project that we're proposing. People asked me before, are there other installations of this size? And the answer is yes. Most of them are in Europe. In fact, all of them are in Europe. Today, U.S. does not have any offshore wind installation. The first one is being constructed in Block Island on the East Coast. And Dong Energy has announced a development of 1,000 megawatts, basically similar-sized project, south of Martha's Vineyard. However, it's not going to be floating because the water depth in the continental shelf on the East Coast is much wider, and so the water depth would allow installation of fixed foundations. So size-wise, yes, project of this size already been installed in Europe, particularly in UK, and they will be installed in US. Whether this one will be ahead of Martha's Vineyard project or not, I can't answer, because Dong will have to go through extensive permitting process as well. But nevertheless, we're not really doing something that has not been done before, and we're also doing it with technologies that have already been proven and demonstrated through insurance industry and banks and so on. In addition to just being able to harvest offshore wind off the West Coast because floating foundations now are available, they also offer reduced environmental impacts, because when you put fixed foundations on the ocean floor, you have to put some foundation, something that these units will be sitting on. When you talk about floating foundations, they use mooring lines and they use anchors, similar to what you use for boats. And so their impact on the ocean floor is greatly reduced compared to fixed foundations. Also, when you put floating foundations, you are less restricted in where they're going to be installed. And so you can select your site not just on the water depth, but also on other elements like reduced biodiversity, reduced birds, reduced mammals, reduced whatever other things. And that allows you more flexibility. Another advantage is that most of these units are assembled on shore. You're not going to do a lot of work offshore. You're only going to bring them, hook up to the mooring that has been pre-laid ahead of time, and that reduces your environmental impact in terms of how many boats you're going to be having there, and also access to the facilities or infrastructure. In order to install fixed foundations, you need very large cranes that are floating cranes. For doing floating foundations that will be assembled on shore, you don't need those cranes. You can use onshore infrastructure. And that has been the challenge for the United States, because we don't have the infrastructure. So in a way, we are able to do a project for lesser cost because the infrastructure we would use is readily available. There is another element that you may or may not know. We as the United States have a law called the Jones Act that prevents foreign flag vessels operating in the U.S. waters. They can operate, but they cannot come to shore. And we don't need those vessels because we'll be using U.S. flag vessels because, again, the size of those vessels is readily available in the fleet of the United States. So when we looked at everything that we needed to do, we took a lot of inputs from actually you, the public, and Morro Bay Commercial Fishermen Organization. We were able to identify the site that we believe have been optimized and actually will provide clean energy with clean views. You're not going to see the installation if you're standing on shore. It's going to be too far away. The human eye can only see about 10, 15 miles without being assistant, like with the binoculars or a telescope. And the installation is going to be further than 20 miles away. Plus, there is visual impacts of moisture in the air. So literally, you're not going to see it unless you take a helicopter or somehow otherwise you're going to propel yourself to the site. By being that far out, we are able to get better wind resource. We're going to be in the 8.5 or greater meters per second wind resource, and that's very good. And it also creates a lesser biodiversity. In other words, when you go in the deeper water, because the sunlight does not reach the bottom, it doesn't create a lot of food for the marine life. You have a lot less of it. You have a lot less birds. You have a lot less fish. You have a lot less mammals. There is a lot less of it. It is not the same as if you stand on shore. So what you see on shore is very different than what you see much further offshore. And so by being further offshore, it benefits with reduced impacts to the environment. So we have taken in consideration a lot of inputs from people. Fishermen wanted us to go further offshore in deeper waters, be further from their primary areas, which I think we did. By going in the area that we did, we are already seeing that there is a lot less birds in there, a lot less mammals. We are in the area that could be described as an essential fish habitat, which is fine, because we're putting structures and they're actually beneficial to the fish. And we're out of shipping lanes. So all those filters that we had to apply, I think we managed to satisfy them. So here is how the process went on finding where we should be. This is a map of California. And I can't, oh, there we go. Somewhere, there we go. So this map was prepared by National Renewable Energy Lab, and it gives you the intensity of the wind. The darker the color, the better the wind is. So you can see that the wind is very good in Northern California. However, there is no transmission lines in Northern California. As you come to the Central California, the wind is still reasonable. And what we wanted to do is get this pink color, which is 8.5 meters per second wind. And we were able to capture that in the water depth that we will be in. So our goal was to be right kind of around here, and yet bring the power back to Morro Bay to connect to the existing substation. And by doing what we're doing, we'll be able to reuse the infrastructure on shore without really touching the shoreline at all, because the infrastructure is already there. So this is the area where we are looking. It's about 34 miles as the crow flies to the Morro Bay inlet. There is an inlet, as you know, a water inlet, right, kind of by Morro Rock, and that's where we would want to bring the cable. We are going to be in a water depth of 500 to 1,000 meters, and on this chart, these lines, they are 100-meter contours. So you can see that we're in a pretty deep waters. We didn't want to go any further because there is a canyon, and it drops off really quickly to almost 1,500 meters. So we wanted to stay, not deeper than 1,000 meters, which is a kilometer. And let's see. So fortunately, there is a buoy. It's a buoy that's managed by National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association, and you can download data from that buoy. You can get wind data, wave data, and so on. And so we're able to get almost 27 years worth of data, and we know that the wind resource is very good in this particular area because it's a buoy directly west of Morro Bay, which is very good. So then we start looking at other constraints. Are we in any protected areas, like California has marine protected areas? We're not. These blue areas is where the marine protected areas are. So we are definitely not in there. Are we in any of the areas that, we were trying to be in the areas that are already close to fishing. And so these areas right here are close to fishing. So we're kind of grabbing one of them, but not completely. And we're staying out of other areas where some of the fishing is prohibited, but also there is rocky areas. So we kind of will be slightly in the protected areas. But again, we don't take fish, and fish actually would like the structures. Then we looked at the bottom trawling intensity. There is a study that was done by NIMS. It's a department under the NOAA, again, National Atmospheric and Oceanographic Association administration, and they didn't see any bottom trawling that is very intense. And so because of that, we can't really see a lot of intensity on this chart. And then we looked at the fixed gear fishing. And so these darker colors is where the fixed gear fishing activities have been known for the period of time that the study was done. Then we looked at black abalone crab critical habitat, and it's all along the shoreline, so we're not entrenching in that either. Then we looked at the coral catch. Now, this was pretty hard to determine what exactly is happening where. The darker the color, the less activity it is. The brighter the color, like we're here, you can see that there is a lot of activity in this area for standardized catch. Seabird density. Now, this is, I know that there is a lot of seabirds on the coast, but again, they're on the coast. Don't make a big distinction between what you see on the coast and what will be offshore. And so this study, there are two studies kind of done. And again, the darker the color, the more intensity there is. So as we go into this area, you can see that it's very light color. That means that there is very little bird activity in this area. And then there is a lot of activity over here, and that's what you see when you stand in Morro Bay onshore. When we looked at marine mammals, and again, the activity is much closer to shore, and a lot less of it is where we're proposing to do the installation. Then we looked at the traffic. Now, there is a lot of traffic here, but really it's this traffic that was impacted. That's the shipping lanes, and you can see that they go like this and will be much further away from any of the shipping lanes. So that was important because these are all commercial fishing, commercial traffic, commercial ocean-going traffic, and you don't really want to be in their path. So that's the location. Now, the project development takes, like I said, many years, and it goes into phases. This chart is, again, from National Renewable Energy Lab that gives you a pretty good description of what happens at every stage. We're at stage number 1. We're planning, because we have not yet even submitted our lease application to the Bureau of Ocean Management. And so when we put this all on the chart in time frame, we see that it will take us 5 to 7 years, probably, or maybe even 10 years, to be able to finish installation and put the first energy into the grid. And what will happen after we submit our application? Bureau of Ocean Management is going to publish in Federal Register that we have submitted application looking for competitive interest in the same location that we have identified. If that interest does not exist, we will receive a non-competitive lease, and that will start our permitting process. The first thing that we have to do, and we have 12 months to do it, is define a site assessment plan, which means it's a document that describes all the studies that we're going to do in the area to characterize the area before we do any further work. During that 12 months, there is a lot of public commenting. We invite the public to participate in scoping of the work that will be done to characterize the area. After we're done with that work, we submit our plan to Bureau of Ocean Management, and once they approve it, then we can implement the plan, which means we go in the ocean, we do the surveys that we described, we do the ocean profiling so that we know exactly what's on the ocean floor, and provide the document that says, here is what our baseline is. After these 12 months, we're going to start, or after the site assessment plan has been accepted, we're going to start developing a construction operation plan. That is when we're going to take the data that we collected from the site and going to use it to do the design. That period will take probably around 4 years, and it's a pretty extensive period. And after the construction operation plan has been submitted to BOEM, again, it includes a lot of public commenting during the process. Only after that, we'll be able to say, yes, now we can start the environmental impact statement. It's a document that's going to be written by the Bureau of Ocean Management. We cannot write this document. They use the data that we collected to write the document, and that will culminate in an assessment of the environmental impacts under the National Environmental Policy Act. It's known as NEPA, and so what we're following is the NEPA process. After all that done, which will take us about 5 years or more, that only then we will be ready to start construction of the project, and we would be able to finance it prior to obviously constructing. So it is not something that's going to be done tomorrow. We are at stage number 0 because we didn't start our process yet, but we chose to do this public information meeting because we realized that everybody is interested. We realized that the more questions you give us, the more answers we can provide, the better the process is going to be, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. How many permits are we going to get? 33. The list is very long. We started with 31, but then we had to add 2 more. One is Department of Defense. The area is slightly in the area that's designated as a missile range from Vandenberg Air Force Base, and so we have to talk to Department of Defense to tell them what we're doing. And the other permit is going to be with the city of Morro Bay because we will be using some of the city infrastructure. So the list is pretty long. It includes federal and state agencies. What will happen after we submit, after we receive, well, I'm not sure at which point, but very early in the process, Bureau of Ocean Management is going to communicate with the governor's office and request formation of a task force that will include all the state agencies. So it's a coordinated process. We don't have to go to everybody individually. It's more done in a cooperative environment. But nevertheless, all the federal agencies that are responsible or have stake in the area, and the state agencies will participate in the process. In addition to that, we're going to be discussing things with stakeholder groups and non-governmental organizations like the Sierra Club, like the Audubon Society, the Nature Conservancy, the Environmental Defense Fund. We have communicated with them at least once, either in meeting or by phone. We have not yet reached everybody, but we will in time. And we also talked to the Northern Chumash Tribal Council because the area is kind of not designated, but they are in this area, and we need to talk to them as well. And obviously, the city of Morro Bay, with whom we have the cooperation agreement. So it's a very lengthy, very intense, very detailed process, and that's what we're starting to do. So the output of our phase 1 work that will be done over the next 5 years, plus or minus something, is going to result, as I mentioned, in the site assessment plan, construction and operation plan. All those plans will become public because that's a part of the process. We also will need a power purchase agreement with a California utility, and we'll have to do transmission interconnection studies to connect to the grid that's available close by. So today, in phase 1, like I said, we met with a lot of entities already, and we'll continue doing so. And we have the signed cooperation agreement, and our plan is to submit the lease application in early January as soon as we get it written up and include all the elements that we need to include in it. So with that, I think the future is very bright for offshore wind. It will be floating. That's kind of something that people already recognize, and we welcome all your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ella and Eric. And so again, for those of you that may have arrived a little bit later, if you've got questions, we're going to take written questions first so we can organize them together and use your time as efficiently as possible. And then we'll take questions from the floor if you wish to offer them that way instead. And again, if you're interested in getting some email notices about future events and progress in this project, I encourage you to sign in on the yellow sheets in the back with your email address so that that can be used to reach out to you and to do that effectively. While I'm organizing this next set of topics here, let's just cover one thing that actually came up in one of the questions and I think would be a good context setter for this. You've outlined a process here that's long, going to be very involved, a major undertaking. What's prompting you to do this? What's happening in the environment of renewables? why this project, why this scale, why undertake all these efforts?
Good question. As many of you know, or maybe all of you know, the state of California's legislature and its governor recently signed into law a requirement that 50% of all the electric energy produced for retail distribution in the state come from defined renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal, etc. The state's probably about 25% renewable now, so it's almost a doubling of that standard. There are a variety of studies that have been done, including important studies by an economic consulting group in California called E3, and I would encourage you to track them down and read some of their work. It's all public, where they've estimated what it will take to go from about 25% to about 50%. And what they do, of course, is count up how many megawatt hours are projected to be consumed out in 2030 and 2040 and 2050, and then multiply that by 50% to come up with what incremental renewable energy is going to be needed. And to translate that from kilowatt hours or megawatt hours, they look at the different technologies that are available, wind and solar in particular, and make some estimates about what a utility scale wind project and a utility scale solar project might produce in the state and come up with an estimate. And that requirement, and again, it's a little bit of assumption driven, would require, I believe, in excess of 100 new utility scale wind and solar projects to be constructed in the state. And as some of you know, the California Air Resources Board is also very involved in setting standards for carbon emissions in the transportation and industrial sector. And they have goals that would increase the need for even more electric renewable energy, because their vision is to electrify a significant portion of California's transportation system. That might add another 50 or 75 more utility scale wind and solar projects. So California, when you go past just talking about percentages, you're in for a very, very major construction program of very large-scale renewable projects. And in addition, all the new transmission lines that are going to be required to move that renewable energy from where it's produced, typically in remote rural areas, to what we call load, which is the major cities and suburban areas of the state. So those are the driving forces, and we believe that there is room for a tiny slice of that future to come from an offshore wind project such as the one we're talking about. So that sort of sets the context for the road that your legislators have put the state on, lots of renewable energy to be sited and built over the next 20 years.
Okay, so let's cover some of the jurisdictional issues here. There are questions about where this fits. So the project is outside of California waters, and therefore there's no need for CEQA consideration on this. It instead goes through the federal process?
As I showed on the chart, the state participates in the process. Even though we're beyond the state line, and the state line is only 3 miles out, the state has to participate because we will be crossing the state line, but they also do so-called federal compliance review. So state agencies participate. We don't necessarily have to get their permit per se, but they have to participate and review the documentation and provide their comments as a part of the task force that will be formed between Bureau of Ocean Management and the state agencies.
Okay. Then there's a question about what would be the role of the city of Morro Bay in this. You've described a couple of roles, a formal role and some informal ones. Could you just articulate that a little bit further, please?
We don't speak for the city, to be clear. We've been in discussions with the city about, I'll call it the situation on the waterfront. And as we looked at that, we realized that there was some existing infrastructure that could be very useful to a project such as the one we're contemplating. It's our understanding that the city owns what was known as the outfall structure, which took the hot water from the former power plant and dumped it out in the ocean. And that has, I believe, reverted back to the city now that that lease is expired. And when we looked for ways to minimize the environmental impact of bringing a power cable to shore, we were standing on the beach and said, gee, wouldn't it be great if that power cable could come through the existing concrete tunnel and make its way without being seen or disturbing anyone and without new construction up past the power plant and into the Pacific Gas and Electric substation. So one possible role was for us to enter into a commercial relationship with the city for the use of that concrete tunnel that's called the outfall structure. There may well be other activities we're going to need to site and construct an operations and maintenance facility. Perhaps there's some areas in the downtown area, including perhaps the Dynegy power plant site, which is, I think, over 100 acres, could be useful for that. But we're at very early days thinking about ways to cooperate and work with the city.
Okay, so that relates to another question that was here about the onshore impacts and where the staging for the construction will be located. And sounds like you haven't sorted that out as yet, but you see some options?
The construction operation plan that I talked about is going to address that question about 2 years from now to start. And in about 4 years from now, we'll know exactly the answers to those questions. It's way too early to say, but one thing I can say that though the city of Morro Bay could be a very good maintenance facility, I doubt that we'll be physically constructing things here. And think about it this way. Construction is a one-time event. It happens and it's done. You know, you're going to spend maybe a year or two constructing, but that's it. It's the long-term maintenance activity that is going to be a lot more interesting, I think, from the economic development and economic impact to the community, because it's very long-time jobs and they're very high-quality jobs. So we don't have the answers where what will be constructed or how, but we will as we go through the process. And as I mentioned, all those documents will become public. They will include your participation, and the answers to those questions will come in time.
And that relates to a couple questions from a couple of people about what will be the economic benefit of this proposed energy generation facility for the Morro Bay area, for the city, and for beyond, and other particular revenue streams that might come to the city. I think you've spoke to that a little bit. If you'd summarize that, I think people would appreciate that on several questions that came in.
Well, as an economist, I would tell you we want to be very cautious. We're not here to make wild claims about lots of employment. We think that the operation and maintenance facility that Ala has talked about would eventually provide a number of very high-quality family wage jobs. But we're going to be very careful about making lots of claims about that. We think it certainly will be positive, but we're not going to start by over-promising and under-delivering.
Okay. Question here about where will this energy go if it comes in and goes through the substation? Where does that, who will that benefit?
Electrons go where they want to go is the answer. As an electrical engineer, they would be put on the backbone system of the California grid, and depending on load flows at any point in time, they could flow north, south, east, or west. There are actually computer programs that can be accessed, and that would be accessed by the California Independent System Operator as they evaluate the impact of such a facility on the high voltage grid. They actually have neat little models that show you with arrows showing where the electrons flow during different types of the day. And that's how they do their engineering studies to determine what's the impact of putting this amount of power into the grid at different times of the day. So I can't answer it, but it ultimately goes to some light switch someplace.
Okay. So then just as a heads up on the set of things I'm seeing here, and welcome other cards if people want to send them forward, but here are the topics that are coming up. Some additional questions about the location and about alternative locations. There's some questions that have come in, people wanting to understand some more about the scale, lifespan, and characteristics of these wind turbines and how they sustain themselves in the ocean conditions. There's a series of questions about impacts to the various species and so on that you were identifying earlier that are of interest to people. And then there's a series of questions that get into the connection of this project with the Dynegy facility and understanding a little bit more about how that works. So those are the things that we have queued up here. Welcome other question cards if people want to send them up so we can organize them, but appreciate the thoughtfulness of people in providing the questions that they have already. So let's jump into the questions here about why not place the turbines in the hills along Highway 1, 41, and 46, the Hearst property, San Geronimo, et cetera? Are there considerations about achieving this level of impact in terms of renewable energy contribution on a land base?
Well, land-based wind in California has been aggressively developed since the mid-1970s. If you've traveled out I-10 out to Palm Springs, you see out there probably 4 or 5 different generations of different wind technology. Actually, most of it is not visible, although you see a lot when you drive on I-10. Most of it's up in the hills. And up in the Altamont Pass, of course. And if you're familiar with any of the debate about Altamont, there has been major adverse avian impact in the Altamont Pass and some of the land-based areas. And we would rather not get into situations with major avian impact. The other issue is that California has already developed almost all of its really good wind resources, and what remains is widely viewed to be a poor wind resource and to have very significant permitting, siting, and transmission interconnection. So I'm not thinking that land-based wind in California is going to be a major part of what's going to happen going forward.
Okay.
And let me just add to that. In addition to everything that Eric said, offshore wind provides you a much better resource because land-based wind is impacted by land. Land is a big heat sink. It absorbs the heat during the day, it discharges it closer to the end of the day, and then disturbs the jet streams. So when you go to the ocean, effectively the ocean is a cold media, and so the ocean does not disturb the jet streams. So when you go and get the wind offshore, it's a much higher quality wind, more consistent, and so effectively you're going to get more energy per structure than you can ever get on shore. And that's the reason why people start going offshore, not only because you're running out of good spots on land, because it's only hilltops that really will provide good wind resource, but it's also much better resource. And putting things offshore, yes, you're impacting the fishermen, that's a given, but at the same time you provide much less environmental impacts compared to the impacts that would be on the shore-based wind.
Okay, we have a question here about how might, or whether there was any consideration given to putting this off Avila Beach and using the Diablo Canyon for transmission.
We chose not to look at Diablo Canyon because Diablo Canyon is going to be in operation until 2029. And we wanted to come to market when the market was peaking and maturing, and that's going to be closer to 2022, 2025. So timing-wise, it's not going to work right now. However, when that plant will get shut down and will come to the point where it needs to be repowered or something else needs to be done, and we're already progressing with our project, where it is quite conceivable that offshore wind would be considered for that project as well. But timing-wise, it's too early to even consider it because it's still operational plan.
Okay, we have a question about what impact this project might have on the establishment of a marine sanctuary that could encompass the same area.
There will be a meeting with NOAA in January. I believe it's on January 6th, and it's on Morro Bay City website. And you should, ask a lot of questions of NOAA. I can say that we have discussion. We had met with NOAA. We had a joint meeting with NOAA and BOEM to address the issue of a potential creation of the sanctuary. The sanctuary process, or designation of the sanctuary process, is a lengthy process. What happened right now is a nomination. In other words, anybody can nominate an area. But nomination does not mean designation. It's the designation that's a process that's going to eventually could result in a sanctuary. Because that sanctuary has not been yet created or designated, there is nothing really that's going to impact the project because it's just not there. Even when it could be designated or will be designated, then the project will probably be grandfathered in because it's already will probably be permitted by then, just looking at the time. On the other hand, could the projects be developed in the future, even if the sanctuary is in existence? What we're hearing from NOAA, that yes, it would be possible. What it means that a different agency becomes a lead agency. And it is something that nobody has done before, and we don't know. So we'll see how things develop. For right now, we're proceeding with a process that has been defined by the government, and that's called the leasing of the ocean floor, and that is managed by Department of the Interior, and that's Bureau of Ocean Management. And if and when things change, then we'll deal with them at the time.
Okay. So let's move on to the questions that are about understanding this technology and how it works a little bit better. And one of the questions is, what is the height of these wind turbines? What's the lifespan of them? What's the decibel level of the sonic sound they create? Have there been any studies done of that sound impact on sea life? What can you, and then what is the nature of how they're affixed or anchored to the sea floor? They're floating. People would like to have a little better understanding of just how these are set up.
Let's see. Hopefully I'll remember.
Want me to break it down a little bit better?
I'll answer, and then whatever I didn't answer, please ask me again.
I will.
Okay? All right. So the driving factor to the design of the floating offshore systems is the turbine. The turbines are designed for 25-year life, and such the floating support structures are designed for 25-year life as well. As we see in Europe, since there is 10 gigawatts of installed capacity already there is an opportunity to repower each of those structures. In other words, you modify the nacelle, you modify the gears, you modify whatever, and it is potentially possible to extend the lifespan of the turbines and the support structures as well. The support structure principle design is no different than any marine vessel design. They are, as I mentioned before, they are derivatives from the oil and gas floating platforms, which means they use the same principles, they use the same design requirements and certification requirements. And if you see the buoys that float in the ocean, like marker buoys, there are some that's been in the ocean for 60 years. And that is the principles of the design that are used for the floating support structures as well. With a good maintenance, with their assessment and caretaking, yes, they will be there for 25 years or more, but the initial design span or design life is 25 years for both the turbine and the floating support structure. The floating support structures are moored to the ocean floor. They're moored with anchors. Similar anchors as are used on boats, but much, much bigger. And the size of the anchor is calculated through the design stage such that it is going to be there for the required lifespan of the structure. The anchors are set in the ocean floor. They go about 10 meters below the surface level, such that what you see literally on the floor is going to be basically the mooring line that's going to be coming from the bottom. Let's see, what was the other question? Then there were the questions about the height of these the height.
Turbines?
The units that we will be looking at are going to be 7 to 8 megawatt units. They are produced either by Siemens. It's a 7 megawatt unit produced by Siemens and 8 megawatt produced by MHI Vestas. The Siemens unit has the rotor diameter of 154 meters, which means you divide it by half to get the blade length, and the MHI Vestas unit is 164 meter diameter. Now, in ocean, compared to land, you actually want to be as close to the water as possible rather than as high as possible, because on land, you're trying to get the best wind resource and it's going to be higher. In ocean, it doesn't vary as much, and we want to be as low as possible. So nacelle, which is called the hub height, is going to be about 100 meters above the water level, because you need to allow distance for the gray water or green water, which is the waves, not to hit the bottom of the blade of the wind turbine. And so that distance is about 20 meters. So basically, the hub height is 100, and now you have to add a half of the diameter. In the worst case, or MHI Vestas is 82 meters. So the highest point could be 182 meters times 3. It's about 600 feet.
Okay. And what is understood about the sound of how much sound these generate, and about any sonic studies on sea life of that sound?
A lot of studies have been done in Europe because of so many units that have been already installed. And what they found out that the noise generated by the spinning turbine is actually below the sea noise. Ocean is a very noisy environment, just from natural forces of waves and wind and so on. And so the generation or the spinning of the turbine is below this so-called ocean noise. As we go through the process of permitting and so on, and studies that we'll be doing, the data will be made available. I don't have the data right now, but those studies have been done, and the results were that these turbines do not generate any higher noise that's already available there.
Don?
Okay. So, Joey, I know you've been standing there, but we've got all these questions that folks have already submitted.
But it pertains to what you just said about the vibration. It's not the sound, it's the vibrations.
Okay.
Are there any studies that have been done to show how marine life will react to the vibrations that this large array is going to make? And also, and I'll be done, and also, when you say that it's like based on the oil rigs infrastructure, is there going to be a time comes when, like the oil rigs, they try to just dump these things back into the water and call them reefs? Thank you.
Okay. And I don't want you to, any of the audience members, to feel like I'm trying to cut off more interaction, but I do want to honor the fact that there are a lot of questions here, and there is going to be time for open mic at the end if there's something that you want to drill in deeper. But I want to be sure that the dozens of people that have questions already on the table here have a chance to get them answered, and get them answered in as organized and efficient way as we can. So I hope that you'll work with your fellow members of our community on that with us, so that we can do that effectively. And let's do you have a quick answer about the vibration?
Yes.
Since we're already on it, but then let's stick with the program here to make sure everyone's question areas get covered.
Vibration is applicable to fixed foundations because they're fixed to the ocean floor, and obviously the vibration that's coming from the nacelle and the turbine itself will propagate down to the bottom and will be vibrating. It's not really applicable to floating structures because, same as the boat, it's just going to move, and that's about it. So there is really no vibration propagation per se that's going to impact the marine life, because it's just a structure. And if you had a chance to go to Portugal, or Norway for that matter, and see the units operating in wave environment, you would be basically amazed at how stable they are. They really don't vibrate. And because it's somewhat soft structure, it floats, a lot of these motions get absorbed by the water, and so none of that is really impacting on any marine life whatsoever. There was a marine study done in Portugal, at least I know of that one, and I'm pretty sure the Norwegians have done the same, just to see whether there was any impact on the local area. I don't have that study, but with time we can probably get the study, because they did look at the sound vibration, they did look at the population, and what they found out that there was a colonization of a sea bass, and the structures grew a lot of mussels.
Okay, and I believe under the application process...
Hold on, let me answer the second part of it, the decommissioning. Oil structures today, at least those off the California coast, they all fixed foundations. They don't float. They fixed to the ocean floor. So when it comes to decommissioning, you have to ask your question, is it going to be worse for me to pull it out of the ocean, or is it better for me to cut off the top and leave the rest there, because it became already an artificial reef? And that's what people have been kind of deciding what to do. Floating structures, on the other hand, do not sit on the ocean floor. The only thing that's in the bottom of the ocean floor are anchors. So on the decommissioning, you pull the anchors out, you take them out, and you recycle them. Nothing is left, and that's another advantage of floating structures, that there is nothing left on the area after you decommission because of what you used to install them in the first place.
Okay, moving on to other questions. How many turbines do you envision in total?
It is hard to answer that question right now, so we're saying it's 100 plus or minus something. Why is it 100 plus or minus something? What we don't know today is how much energy we can deliver to the grid. We know what that plant that's sitting here has generated. We know how big the substation is. What we don't know is how much capacity is in the backbone, and that all will get determined as we go. We don't know what size of the turbines we're going to use at the time when we're going to construct. Today's 7 and 8 megawatt turbines exist. By that time, maybe 10 megawatt turbines will exist. So all of those questions is too early to answer, but as we go through the construction operation plan, as we go through the design, probably 2-3 years into the design, we will know answers to those questions, and we'll be able to answer exactly how many units we're going to install.
Okay. And will the wind turbines be vulnerable to tsunamis or earthquakes? And how do they address that?
Well, let's go back and address what tsunami. Tsunami is a very, very long wave, but it's of a certain amplitude. If you remember the earthquake in the Indian Ocean, and if you look at those that were hurt and those that were not hurt, it's those that were in the deeper ocean that just rode the wave, and it's people that were on shore that saw the most impact of a tsunami. Why is it? The waves, that when they travel, they are of a certain size and of a certain length. It's called the period of the wave. But when the waves hit the ocean floor, they get amplified. And successive amplifications create this destructive force of a tsunami that we see when it comes on shore. But if you are in the deeper ocean before the waves hit the ocean floor, that happens at about 40-meter water depth, you just ride the wave. And so when you design, you have the mooring called slack mooring that gives you ability to withstand the waves, and you design for this maximum wave that happened in the area over in a so-called 50-year storm, and you just ride the wave. And as you look in the history and look at what happened to those people that were on the boats in the Indian Ocean when the tsunami happened, nothing happened to them. They just said, how come this wave was so big? Well, it was a tsunami wave that didn't yet hit the ocean floor. So nothing happens. Also, when the earthquakes happen, you know, the ocean floor will move. Again, when you have mooring lines that are flexible, they will just move. If you have a fixed foundation, that's a lot more challenging. But we're not putting those. We're just putting mooring lines. And so we don't see that either tsunamis or the earthquakes are going to affect the operation of the structures just because of their design features.
Okay. So let's take a look at some other items here. There's a question, can you discuss the offshore cable feed technology in terms of EMF, electromagnetic fields, and also maintenance?
The cables that export the energy, and it's called the export cable, that would be a very large cable that's going to be only one or maybe two at the most, that's going to come from the farm to the water intake that we discussed before. They are heavily insulated cables. They don't really produce any EMF. It is quite conceivable that we will use so-called HVDC, which is high voltage DC cable that has even less emissions. So from what we've seen in Europe, and again, you know, there is a lot of cables on the ocean floor in Europe, there is really no impact on the marine life from the electromagnetic field because of the insulation used in those cables. I can't give you the size of the cable, but they're very, very large, and there is a lot of insulations incorporated in them.
And what's the typical incoming voltage of those cables?
I don't think I can answer it right now because it really depends on how the design of the unit will be, unless you can answer that.
I don't have an answer, but I'm
Turn on the mic.
I'm thinking maybe 2,400 volts before it gets stepped up at the major substation, stepped up to grid voltage. 2,400
volts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Subject to check, 2,400
right.
volts.
So these are basically not in the category of high voltage lines at that.
No, they don't get to be high voltage until they go through the step-up transformers and pushed up the grid voltage.
Okay. So we're moving on now to a different segment here, which is about the concerns that questions that people have with regard to impact on species. So let's cover a number of them here. Well, all of them, in fact. But What are the potential negative impacts of this proposal to the Morro Bay fishing industry? In other words, you stated that you created the position of this project to minimize impacts, but what would be the, nonetheless, remaining impacts that you might see, and what would be the types of impacts?
Well, I did something good.
I think they were the slides that follow that.
Slideshow. Anyways, let's just go
I think
here.
they're trying to help you with the...
Oh, they are? Okay, hopefully.
Back there. So
Anyways.
I think that we're on a... Is it... which slide are you at?
Well, I just need to be on
a
a slideshow mode, and I'm not. But the slide is okay. So the impact to the fishing community. These structures will be more to the ocean floor. There will be electrical cables connecting them. So effectively, we will have to restrict trawling and netting in the area. But you can do surface fishing with poles, with fishing lines and stuff like that, because all the gear, which is mostly electrical cables, are going to be at least 20 meters below the surface level. And that is the impact. You cannot do trawling and you cannot do netting. But besides that, there is really no other impact. The area is not closed for passing by. In other words, you can go through it. The units will be spaced at least 1,000 meters or kilometer apart, which is, what is it, half a mile? Yeah, half a mile apart. So they're quite far apart, but yes, there will be impact to trawling and netting.
Okay, moving on, there's questions about impact on birds and interest in what kinds of impacts the seabirds have been observed in other locations when using the type and number of wind turbines being proposed for this area.
There is a national lab called the Pacific Northwest National Lab that has Marine Science Center in Sequim, Washington. That lab has done the most research on marine mammals and fauna and flora. They will participate in the project. We had one phone call with the Audubon Society and the lady from the PNNL. From what we know, there are two types of birds that exist in abundance in this area. It's going to be the shearwater and short-tail albatross. Both of those birds fly fairly low to the water surface, and so from what we see from their behavior, they will be below the blade level. In other words, the blade level is about 50 meters above the sea level rather, and they fly below that level. Also, based on the studies that were done in Europe, and that was the comment that was made by PNNL, seabirds seem to be smarter than the land-based birds. Don't know why, but they seem to avoid atmospheric disturbances much better than their counterparts on land. And so because of that, what they've seen in Europe, that they avoid wind installations rather than land-based birds just kind of go to them. Now, there are some explanations. Some explanations are food. You know, in sea, the food is going to be in the water, and so they have to fly fairly low to see the food and get the food, where on land, the food is available in different areas. So, but again, I'm not a bird, so I can't really explain why they do what they do. Another point to make is you think of air as no media, right? It's very thin and it has kind of a no substance to it. Actually, it does. And because it does, when the turbine spins, it does create an air disturbance. And the seabirds recognize this air disturbance. Because they know how to manage storms, and in a way to them, it could be viewed as a storm. And so maybe that's another reason why they avoid the installations. But there was a study done in Scotland that pointed just that the seabirds don't fly into the wind turbines installed offshore.
Okay. The next set of questions here about potential impacts relate to marine mammals. In whales in particular, but other marine mammals as well. What studies shown in other locations regarding interaction with marine mammals, with offshore wind installations, in particular the anchor lines, and what impact would this have on the whale migrations north and south along the coast, and how would you be evaluating that?
Right. These are all very good questions, so I'll keep going with questions. Marine mammals have pretty significant sonar capabilities. That's how they determine what's in front of them and where they move. We're talking about very large structures. All the issues that we've seen in entanglement of marine mammals have been with structures or mooring lines that are very thin and they cannot detect them. We're talking about significant size mooring lines and structures that are going to be about 10 meters in diameter. So to the marine mammals, they're visible. They will not run into them. And that's exactly what's been seen in Europe as well. They just avoid them. And because they're spaced pretty far apart, there is enough area for them to maneuver. Also, these mooring lines are under tension, so it's not like you can go in and entangle very easily. Plus, they can't because they're so big. And so just the size of these structures matters a lot to marine mammals, and we don't see and don't foresee that there will be really issues with them. They will just avoid the structures because they can see them.
Okay. And as you described before, there will be full-blown studies about these things and
Correct.
opportunities for the public to question that, the methodologies, the approaches, the results, et cetera,
Right.
in the formal process. So,
And again, we will be bringing in experts in the area, which is specifically the PNNL lab that has done a lot of research, and that's how we manage the whole process.
okay. We're going to move over into some other questions, and these relate to some of the linkages with Dynergy, with the facility here. What parts of the existing power plant would you need to connect to? And a question of why is this a better use of the existing electrical infrastructure here than solar power or a gas-fired power plant?
I have had 3 or 4 conversations with Dynergy representatives. I don't know, is anyone from Dynergy here tonight? So perhaps if you would like, you could identify yourself and comment later. But I've had 3 or 4 discussions with Dynergy representatives at the officer level about our interests and their interests. I think it's fairly well known that nearly a year ago, Dynergy retained an investment bank to try to sell its California properties, a power plant in Oakland, a power plant in up the coast in this project. And to date, that's been unsuccessful. They tell us that they have been in contract for sale of the project, although we don't know with whom that is, so we don't know what that future, who that party is or what they might do with the facility. We are hopeful that whether it's Dynergy continuing here in some fashion or their successor in interest, that we will be able to work with that party to negotiate a commercial arrangement to utilize that interconnect. That interconnect is actually a right granted by the California Independent System Operator, and it's not for doesn't go on forever. In fact, it began to become a wasting asset in January of 2013, according to the ISO rules. So we think it's got about a 36-month life to it. There are some methods that may be able to extend that before that interconnect right is lost. And by lost, I mean it goes back into the pool of high-voltage transmission resources that the ISO allocates according to its complex rules and procedures for allocating interconnection rights. There's a process available to us, just as it has been to Dynergy, to file for what's known as a cluster study to connect our project to the substation there, and that's an option that we have and that we may well pursue. We would not want to see that the interconnection right lost and taken back into sort of the pool of resources and allocated elsewhere. That process for us would require us to put down a significant study deposit, retain consultants, and try to pursue that process. If we were to do so today, I think we'd probably be second in the queue for access to that line behind Dynegy if they don't do anything with it. I don't know what else to say about that other than that is a point of interconnect. We think that building any new major transmission systems in this state is going to be extremely difficult, extremely costly. And if some of you have followed the controversial history of the Sunrise Line down in the San Diego area, you know how very long that can be. I think that project took more than 15 years from start to finish. So for any new power developer connecting to an existing grid system that does not require major permitting and upgrading construction is highly desirous. And to go back to the earlier discussion about why are we looking here, it's a major reason other than a great wind resource. It's an existing interconnect and transmission system. All this other resource that your state law requires to go up to 50% is going to require the permitting and siting and construction of significant new transmission facilities in the state, and that's going to be a very long and tortuous process for the state and all the communities impacted.
Question here asking, can you harvest wind and wave energy off of your same project?
That's a very interesting question. Back in 2009, while at Principal Power, we did a study of combining wind and wave, and we called it wind wave float. And I was the one that pushed it very hard to say, well, you know, it's going to be great because economics are going to be so much better. You know, we're getting rid of a lot of infrastructure, yet we can use the same structure to add additional power takeoff mechanisms. And I was very, very disappointed when we did all the study, did all the modeling, did all the wave tank testing, and came with the result that I can put 8 megawatt turbine up on the top, but it will take me 5 power takeoff mechanisms, each producing hopefully a quarter of megawatt on a good day to put on the bottom to just get another 2 megawatts. And I said, well, that doesn't make any economic sense. So the answer is technically, yes, you can. Economically, it makes no sense at all.
Okay. Related to the wave question, how would this project interact with the wave energy projects? Can they be complementary? Would they have to be one or the other? Do you have any information about that?
Which wave energy project?
I don't have any details about it. I think there's some that Dynegy may have been working with parties about. Does somebody have a way to amplify on the question so we can get it answered?
I think the project that they're referring to is a Dynegy wave project that they proposed last February. Maybe that helps.
Okay. Yes, our city manager has some information on it.
Just 2 quick things to clarify a number of these is there was referred to a possible sale or a contract for the current sale of the Dynegy facility. From everything that we as a city know, there is no current contract in place. So there's no buyer who's ready to, who's in a contract to purchase the facility right now. There has been interest. There was wave interest in January and February of last year, and the technology developer that was considering wave energy. Our assessment is, well, I'll just say they pulled out of competition to purchase the power plant from Dynegy for the purpose of wave, and it is likely, speaking a little out of turn here, I'd ask probably Eric to clarify, but it is likely that that there's only enough connection capacity through Morro Bay for one large project here. I'm not sure if that's correct, but it would likely be a wind project or a wave project, not 2 separate projects out there. Does that help?
Ala or Eric, anything to add? Okay. So let's...
excuse me, the Dynegy lady seems to have her hand up.
I think there is a wave energy that has a preliminary permit application in, and that's what was probably being referred to.
Okay.
And that permit has not been pulled, so it's still out there. I don't know what's going on with that. I'm not privy to part of that or the Dynegy.
Okay, so just to repeat for the audience that's viewing on the TV, the comment from a Dynegy representative was that there is an application outstanding for a WAVE project, and so that's its current status. And this relates to a question, another question that came up, and that is Trident cooperating with any other ocean-dependent industrial users, such as oil and gas exploration, ocean desalination industry, et cetera?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, this question is asking, is Trident working with any other ocean-dependent industrial users, such as oil and gas exploration, ocean desalination, et cetera?
No, we're not working with anybody else. If the question relates to can something else be done, well, we're not going to talk about oil because we don't do oil. We just do renewable energy and nothing else. Can desalination be incorporated into something of this nature? Maybe eventually, but we're not looking at it at all because you have to be very focused. In a project of this magnitude, of this complexity, we cannot even consider anything else but what we're doing first. If and when technologies become available, the project is installed and generating things fine, and people want to add things to it, well, that could maybe be considered in the future, but definitely not something that we're considering today at all.
Okay. And have you made presentations to the California Natural Resources Department and or the Ocean Protection Council?
We attempted, but we cannot because as of now, none of the state agencies have direction towards the project. As I mentioned before, once we submit the application to the Bureau of Ocean Management, that will trigger the formation of the task force that will include the Ocean Protection Council, that will include State Lands Commission, Coastal Commission, all the other state agencies, and at that time we will go through the formal process of making presentation to them as required.
Okay, I have a few more pickup questions here that didn't fit into any specific category, but I want to be sure that those get covered. I don't know if there are any other question cards out there. If there are, please bring them up, and then after we finish these and any others that come forward, we'll go to hearing questions that people want to express in person. So let's take a look. Some further clarification about looking at the current power plant here. You mentioned about using some things that the city has and so on. What would you need at the current power plant? Would you need anything of it beyond the outfall and the PG&E substation? Do you need any structure in between, or what is required there?
Well, we have not done any preliminary design or conceptual design for what facilities that exist there that we may use. We've not accessed those facilities, so we haven't even done a walkthrough. Our understanding is that the outfall structure terminates on someplace on the north end of the plant, and we would need perhaps an easement or right-of-way to go behind the plant and back to the PG&E substation. But we do not know that for sure now.
Okay. And do you anticipate building the whole project at once or in stages? And how many acres or square miles or whatever would the turbine field encompass?
The first one was what?
Do you see building in stages or all at once? And
okay. The farm will be done in stages, and the quantity of units that will be installed will depend on the throughput of the fabrication facility. If there will be more than one fabrication facility, it could be done faster, but it really depends on how quickly you can assemble the structures and install them. The square area of what would be required for the plant would be probably about half of what you see on the chart. We need to request and ask for the lease of a larger area until we've done ocean surveys and know what's on the bottom of the ocean floor. We want to make sure we're not getting into any sunk ships or any canyons or any rocks or anything like that. And so because of that, we're asking for a larger area, though it will be smaller by the time we get to the final design. Because we can't say how many units exactly going to be installed, we can't also say how big of the area it's going to be. We can only say approximately it's going to be somewhere around 70 square miles, but that's approximate because there is a lot of factors that's going to drive the final site. The only thing I can tell you, it's going to be a lot smaller than what you see on the screen, because we need to get a larger area allocated before we start downsizing it based on the research.
Okay. Then there's a question about security. How will these units be protected from tampering or sabotage, and who will protect them?
That's a good question. It's a part of, I guess, design that will be implemented. All the units are remotely controlled, remotely monitored, and so it is no different than the way you're protecting structures of building with remote systems.
Okay. And you've spoken a little bit about this before, but people were asking about the operations and ongoing maintenance jobs that might be available. What about the installation side? Typically, what sort of skills and such are required to do that? Does that happen locally, some of it locally, most of it distant? How can you give any sense for what those installation opportunities might be?
The installation opportunities are probably going to be very local. We used so-called anchor handling vessels, about 180-ton vessel that would be available in the United States on the West Coast. We know they do exist. It requires installation of mooring lines, which are pre-laid ahead of time, and then towing of the units and then hooking up to the turbines. We can't really say who or what we'll be doing in the right time. At the right time in the stage of development, we will be going for competitive bidding, and at that time we'll be able to determine what the qualifications what qualified contractors are available in the area, and obviously our preference will be using qualified contractors that are local rather than bringing them from the outside, because part of what we're doing is to integrate this project into the community.
Okay, and I see one last question here. You spoke about it a little bit, but people were wondering, is any particular congressional action needed for consideration or approval of this project, or is it all with the constituent agencies at the federal and state level?
I don't believe there is any congressional action required because the law already exists. We're following a federal law of leasing ocean floor from Bureau of Ocean Management, and the regulation that prescribes for the installation of offshore wind on the outer continental shelf. So we're just following the existing process.
Okay. Well, I want to thank the audience for being so patient while you hear and listen to the questions that other members of our community asked on your behalf or on their interest and on the community's behalf in general. So thanks for being patient and letting that process flow through. If you have questions that you'd like to ask directly and to stand up and do that, please go to one of the microphones and queue up, and we'll be pleased to hear what questions you have and seek whatever answers can be provided.
Hi there. You overlooked this question. I'm just curious. You said that the wind quality is better in the ocean than on land. So obviously you're getting more energy for each turbine. Supposing you were to take the same turbine that you're putting in the ocean, you're putting on land. Let's say just onshore right here. The question is, how much more efficient is on land, on the ocean, and how much more it costs to put on the ocean?
It's a question that can be only answered, or at least only one question can be answered, because what you're asking are two questions. One is, what is your capacity factor, which will represent how much energy you will be able to extract from a structure that's installed wherever it's installed. That's the question of how much more efficient one is going to be than the other.
Yeah. If it's twice as efficient on the ocean, then you can justify twice the cost, right?
So capacity factors wise, you can get the data any way you want. Land-based wind produces energy at about 30% capacity factor, plus or minus something. Offshore wind, from the installations seen in Europe and also from the two prototypes, one in Norway and one in Portugal, we see capacity factors greater than 40%, approaching 50%. So theoretically, you will be producing more energy just because of where you are and what your resource is. The second question that you ask is either related to the installed capital cost or the levelized energy cost, and I'm not sure which one it is.
I mean, to build and install the turbine on water.
So that's a capital.
Yeah, it's going to cost more, right?
Well, it may or may not, and the answer is I don't know because it's very hard to compare. It's really impossible to answer that question because at the end of the day, you're looking at three numbers. One is overnight capital cost, which is today I didn't have it, tomorrow I have everything, including permits and everything else. Then you have the levelized energy cost that takes all the time-related cost and amortizes over the life of the performance of the project. And then you have the final number, which is really the most important number. What is going to be the price of energy that you're going to sell in the grid? And that final number has to be market-driven. It is whatever the market parity is, and that's why we're doing what we're doing, because we believe we can meet the market parity cost of the energy that would be sold to the grid.
And let me supplement that answer a little bit. So there is the cost of installing a land-based unit and the cost of installing an ocean-based unit. Land-based unit, we know in California, has significantly less annual energy production. We also know that the profile of land-based wind in California is far more intermittent. It goes up and down a great deal more than wind energy. Well, the intermittency, which is, as you probably know if you follow renewable energy, is one of the areas that critics of renewable energy often raise, that the sun doesn't shine all the time, it's intermittent, clouds come over, solar production collapses very, very quickly when it gets cloudy, and wind production can collapse very, very quickly too as wind comes and goes. What that does is cause a huge problem for the grid manager, the California Independent System Operator. And how do they manage something when wind comes up or wind goes down? So they typically manage it by turning up and turning down fossil fuel generated generation, typically gas-fired combustion turbines. So land-based wind and land-based solar has a much larger requirement to be backed up, if you will, by fossil fuel-fired electric generation. And I could go on about what technologies they use to do that, but when you talk about cost, you really have to look at costs across the system and what is happening to get that kilowatt hour to replace the wind that didn't blow in the last hour. So it's a bit of a complex answer, I'm sorry, but it's a complex issue.
Okay, we'll take the gentleman over there. And if you wish to offer your name and your and any affiliation, that's fine. If you don't, we didn't ask people to write their names on the cards, but I just wanted to be friendly.
My name's Evan Barbas, and I'm a captain in the U.S. Merchant Marine. You mentioned that the turbines weren't going to be visible from land, but the geographical height of eye for the turbine height is 17 miles to the horizon where you'd be able to see it. So somebody living on the hill has a geographical range of 17 miles. So you would have a combined height of eye of 34 miles. So are the turbines going to be lighted? Because if they're lit for aviation, now you have the luminous range of the light, which you'll have see a city out at shore, offshore at night. And so my concern is that you will be able to see it, even though you said you couldn't see it. And out at sea, I've seen this many times, calling on ports, when we see land fall is, easily 34 to 50 miles, depending on that height and the geographical height and the luminous range of the light.
Right. This is a very good question. And as we go through the process, we will do simulations, what you can and cannot see. What we can tell you right now, this 34-mile line over there is to the substation offshore. The substation is not going to have any turbines. So your closest corner is going to be 34 miles. Everything else is going to be even further offshore. Now keep adding another kilometer for each unit that's installed. Yes, they will have navigation lights because you have to on a hub height. So that's 100 meters off. It's not at the tip of the blade. The tip of the blades don't have any navigation or lights. It's only on the hub height. So the human eye has also certain distance as far as it goes. But basically what we're saying is because it's so far out, And
well,
because
I'll tell you that the math is the square root of the height of I times 1.17.
Right, I agree with you.
That's to the geographical horizon. Yeah. So then with this lit, it has nothing to do with our eyes. It has to do with the structure itself. We will be able to see that, the human eye, at 1.17, the square root of the height of I.
Okay, that's fine.
So what I'm saying is, no matter how far offshore it is, depending on if you're living on the hill in the harbor track, or you're living, on the north side of town up on the hill, your height of I and your distance to the horizon is a lot farther than if you were at sea level. So even at the corner of your proposed project, even if those blades are farther offshore, then the luminous range adds an extra distance. So we as citizens will probably be seeing a city of 100 lights offshore.
Well, as I said, as we go through the process, we will be doing simulations, and then we'll show you what you may or may not be able to see.
Sir.
Sure. Bill Martini, Morro Bay. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. One question came up at Moore has to do with Dynegy, PG&E substation. Can you get to the substation without having to go through Dynegy? Because it sounds like they may have the key. In other words, if you get to the substation and bypass Dynegy from the outfall, are you home, or do they have rights to the substation as far as tying to the grid that you wouldn't have?
We don't know. Again, I said earlier that we have not had access to the property. We've not done any engineering studies of the distance from the end of the outfall to the substation. So we might need properties from them or easements from them. I just don't know.
Correct. And the reason I was asking is because you can loop around to the substation without going through Dynegy. But the point being is, would you be able to hook up to the grid with or without Dynegy? In other words, does Dynegy have rights to the grid that you need, or could you separately hook up to the grid along with Dynegy? In other words, is it an either or? You only are able to hook up to the grid?
I think there's two questions there. One is there a pathway from the end of the terminus of the outfall to the substation that does not involve property of Dynegy? The answer is I don't know. Perhaps there is. That would be good if there isn't. The interconnection rights that are issued by the California Independent System Operator are a wasting asset. In other words, if they're not utilized after a certain point of time, according to ISO rules, they will be lost and taken back into the pool that's distributed by the system operator. For the time being, those rights reside with Dynegy, but they will not reside there forever, because if they're wasting, they will be taken away. So, as I said earlier, our plan would be to file to get in the queue behind them, so we'd be next available to ourselves if that happened. So, we don't have a clear plan, but we think we have a way to go about it.
Correct. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions from the audience? Please step up to the microphone, and if you have a question, if you might get up to the microphones just so we can determine how many people are stacked up, so that we are able to allocate your time.
Go ahead.
Ladies first.
No, you were first. Go ahead.
Could you talk about the assembly of the turbines? Are they going to be locally done on land here in Morro Bay?
It is difficult to say where they're going to be assembled. Morro Bay does not have any so-called shipyard. You don't have infrastructure to support something of that nature. So my guess, and that right now is only a guess, that probably they will be assembled somewhere else, but they will be maintained from here. And again, I would stress the point that assembly is a one-time event. Once you assembled and installed, that's it. I think, in my opinion, it's the maintenance that's going to be a lot more interesting for anybody, just because of the length of time it's going to be required. But at this point, to say where they're going to be assembled is impossible.
So you wouldn't know where they're going to be launched either then?
I cannot answer that question right now, but during construction operation plan, we'll determine all those possible options.
And one other question is, aren't the transmission lines from the power plant here already being utilized by the solar plants out on the Carrizo? And if so, how would you be able to tie into that?
Our understanding from talking with Dynegy's own transmission consultants is that some of the transmission interconnect capacity that used to be here, which we believe approached 1,000 megawatts, has in fact been returned to the ISO and allocated to the solar projects in the Carrizo Plain. The 650 megawatt capability that resides here still resides with Dynegy.
Yeah, hi, Susan Schneider. I'm a Morro Bay resident. I'm here as a resident, but I'm also I own Phoenix Consulting, and I'm a consultant for grid interconnection and PPAs for independent generators. So I think I think you're right. The 650 megawatts still resides here. I think it's not going to be here for as long as 36 months. And if you're looking at doing any kind of repowering using the Dynegy facility as opposed to a new grid interconnection, I think you're going to need to do something maybe in the next few months. I think their rights go somewhere around February to April, somewhere in there, given how long the project's been closed. And so if you're going to get behind them, you can do that at any time in the cluster process, as you said. But I think if you're trying to try and work with them as a repowering and use the rights that they have, you'll have to start that process a lot sooner.
Yeah, we believe we understand from the meeting with the ISO that clock started on 36 months in January of 2013, and there are we're also told some opportunities for that time period to be extended. I don't know what those details are.
I think that might be to complete the process, but you might have to initiate it sooner. So anyway.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions from the audience? Comment from the city manager or Steve? Do you have one that you wanted to? Were you a wrap up or a fill in?
I just wanted to right near the end here, so I don't get in the middle of the conclusion. Say that this has been a seminar hosted by Trident Winds, who reached out to Don Maruska to moderate. We appreciate that. The city of Morro Bay, as Don noted earlier, has entered a memorandum of cooperation with Trident Winds, which means the City Council essentially voted to say, hey, we would like to cooperate with Trident to do things like provide a venue so that our residents and folks in the local area could participate in an activity just like this. There will be a nearly identical seminar in this room on the 6th of January. I'm sort of changing subjects here, but a public service announcement on the 6th of January with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Foundation. So NOAA is going to have a seminar here on the 6th of January, 6 p.m., same room, exact same setup, in which NOAA will be here to answer questions and have a very similar activity with regard to marine sanctuaries in general and specifically the proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. So if you're interested in that, I invite you to come back on the 6th of January right here at 6 p.m. And that, too, is a NOAA-hosted event, but we want our residents, our citizens, to be able to get that information, so the city is helping to facilitate by providing space. Thanks.
So any final questions from the audience? Please step up to the microphone.
Hi. Scott Morris from Los Osos, but I hang out in the Bay a lot. But I wanted to first thank you both for coming and putting this on, all three of you. I think your early sharing of information is much appreciated by me and hopefully others. I think that the rest of the world over across the Atlantic seems to be catching on that we can move beyond fossil fuels and start getting some sustainable energy. So I appreciate your commitment to renewable energies. And so I think this is a good idea, but it's going to be a big, challenging project, so you seem to understand that. One question I have is kind of a general one, is the winds come and go, and energy storage is very challenging. What are your ideas on storing energy for this, other than I know that the grid has ways to manage it, but with renewable intermittent energies all over the world, there's all sorts of thoughts of compressed air energy or different ways that one can put these intermittent energy sources and make them a little less intermittent. Do you have any ideas along those lines?
I think the storage question is certainly on a lot of people's minds for exactly the reasons you stated. The deep water installations actually offer interesting opportunity for compressed air storage, but that is not something we're going to tackle with immediately. When the installation is installed and when things are fine, then adding compressed air storage is possible, and maybe we'll address at that point, but definitely not right now. However, technologies do exist. It is naturally available to installation in that water depth and that location, and so we'll see how things develop. And thank you very much for your comments.
Okay, Steve, please.
Yes, hi, I'm Steve Reinecke, and I had one comment and one question here. So one comment, I noticed earlier when you're talking about the fisheries data, you used 2006 to 2010 trawl data. I'd recommend using a different time frame. Reason being is during that time period, it was very low trawl activity. In fact, 3 out of 5 of those years, there was no trawl fishing whatsoever. So if you use data, I'd recommend probably mid-2011 onwards to represent more recent activity. Second, like for other fisheries, with NOAA fisheries, you should talk to the observer programs, because fisheries that I think that this could impact, and you'd have to look at the observer data, would be like pot and trap sablefish fishing and longline sablefish fishing, and potentially surface fisheries for sablefish, drift net fishing. So maybe reach out to I didn't know what your plans were to reach out with with NOAA fisheries and the observer programs.
Right. We have reached out to NOAA, and in fact, on the flyer on the back of it, you see the list of all the references where we use the data. That data was provided to us and some of the references from NOAA. We have not yet had specific discussion with NOAA Fisheries. It's a NIMS program, which is a little bit different, which we will. But we are in very close communications with NOAA because, first of all, we have to, and second of all, they certainly have a lot of data. So the choice of the site was not arbitrary. It took this many months because I know people were asking me back in July, where are you going to locate it? I said, I don't know yet, because it took to collect that data. And so today, the references that we used are provided to you. As we move forward and as more participation comes from federal agencies, we will refine the site, and that is why we're asking for a release of a much larger area so that we have an opportunity to adjust it as we move along.
Jeremiah O'Brien, Moore Bay Commercial Fishermen's Organization. Thanks, Al and Eric. And I kind of just wanted to reiterate what Steve said, because in the past, 15, 20 years, Morro Bay is between the number 1 and number 3 largest landings of swordfish and shark on the coast here, and I didn't see them appearing on your list. And as well as Steve hit a good point that it had escaped me, that there was a period of minimal fishing in the trawl and in the blackcod, which would be the trap and the long line. And then there's been an accelerated period over the last 7 or 8 years. So the latest possible data, which we actually have a great deal of it ourselves on our economic impact report, I think I supplied you with. So I think using the latest possible data would be crucial in determining the impacts.
Right, and we will be using it, like I said, as we start moving through the detailed assessment. This data that we use, that's provided on the back of the flyer, gave us the gross assessment, which kind of pointed out, again, taking your inputs or your members' inputs of saying, go a little bit further off, go into that neighborhood. We were trying to, like I said, not get into the very, very deep ocean, because that is a lot more challenging for the mooring, and that's why we moved where we are proposing to do it now. And then we will go through the micrositing and refinement, taking a lot more inputs into defining the final site.
Okay, I just noticed there was things missing.
Yep. Got it.
Thank you. Any other questions from our audience this evening?
Donna, I have just one last comment. That is, we brought a bunch of snacks this evening, so please help yourself on the way out. And if you have friends at the office that could use something, take it with you. Or if you know a connection with a local food bank, please feel free to do that. We can't take it with us.
Yeah, well, and I just want to say thank you very much for coming. As I said a number of times, this is a long process. I'm sure we're going to get to know each other a lot better as things progress. And I do want to say one point that was actually commented. We didn't have to make this meeting. We chose to do this meeting because nobody likes surprises. And it is better to at least tell you what we're planning to do so that we can get some of their inputs rather than us telling, oh, by the way, we're going to do it there, and who cares what you think. We will take your inputs, but keep in mind that the project needs to happen. We all need it. The ocean needs it. People need it. If we are to wean ourselves from fossil fuels, that's the only way we can do it, is if we use renewable energy. At some point in the future, we may figure out how to use nuclear safely, but not yet. And until we get there, we don't want to destroy the planet in the process either. And so just keep that in mind as we go through. We don't know all the answers, as you saw. There is a lot of questions more than the answers, but we'll figure them out as the process takes place. So thank you very much for being here.
Okay, just a final note. Yes. Go right ahead and thank them. And I want to applaud you as an audience. You've been very thoughtful in your listening, thoughtful in your questions. Appreciate how you came together as our community to learn about this opportunity. I do want to highlight some additional ways you can get information. If you'd like to get email updates, you can sign the yellow sheets that are on the table at the back with your email address that you can receive that. If you're watching on the TV and you don't have access to those yellow sheets, you can see on the flyer that's posted on the city's website. Just go to the City of Morro Bay's website, search under Trident. You'll find the flyer for tonight, and it's info@tridentwinds.com. There will be a video of the whole session that would be posted on the website. So people will be able to not only see the materials, but hear the answers and hear the discussion around it. So you have a full record of that. And that's being provided by the City of Morro Bay. The city is providing that. So we appreciate AGP being here and organizing that for you. And again, this is part of the cooperative agreement between the city and Trident Winds to make information as available to you as possible. So all the things that are coming up, you can find on the city website. At least all the information is publicly available, and so I encourage you to tap that. So thanks again for being a great audience, for being concerned about our community and learning about things that are happening and sharing your ideas. Thanks for being here this evening.